Good morning, church, and happy Easter. We have made it through Lent. We have made it through Holy Week. We have made it through these last three most solemn of days as we remember Jesus and his crucifixion, his death, his burial. And now it is Easter. And as much as I'm celebrating today, today is also a day when, more than any other time, I'm going to miss seeing you and miss being able to gather together with you. Someone said this past week that this state that we're now in as the church is kind of like being in a long distance relationship. You don't want to stay like this. It is what it is for a season, and we'll make the best of it, and we'll come out stronger because of it. But we look forward to the day when we can be reunited and we can see one another again. I certainly am looking forward to that day. Well, today I am telling you the good news. This is the good news that is beyond all other good news. And this good news comes from John chapter 20. If you'd like to follow along there. And I'm telling the good news from the Overlook Trail in Houghton. Woman, why are you crying? It was surprising at this point that Mary Magdalene hadn't run out of tears yet. She had been crying, it seemed like, for days. It all started on Thursday night, when Judas, her friend, Jesus's friend, had shocked them all and betrayed Jesus. And then there were the rumors, not knowing what was going on, rumors of a trial, of Jesus being dragged here and there, someone saying he's been beaten, they're out to get him. And then the long night of waiting to see what would happen, and then finally seeing him again, bloody, beaten, bruised, mocked, spit on, carrying a cross down a long road up the hill, that long journey to the top of the hill, where she followed him and watched him gasping for his final breaths, listening to his mother and the other women sobbing and wailing, and just watching and waiting for the inevitable, until it finally happened and Jesus died. The awful feeling as they took the cross down and wrenched the nails out of his hands and rolled his limp body off the cross and covered it with a shroud and carried it off to an empty tomb. She had wept so much, and then she knew she wanted to be able to properly bury her master and her friend. But the next day was the Sabbath, and so there was more waiting, doing nothing, playing those scenes over and over again in her head, and just weeping. Until Sunday morning, she woke up early, before it was light. She crept out of the house. She walked down the city streets, which were all covered with the litter of a festival the day before. All the houses and the inns were packed full of guests. The whole nation had come together into the city. The roads were packed down and the animals tied up here and there, but all was quiet and all was still as Mary picked her way down the road through the city, out the gate, down the road which she knew led to the garden where the tomb was, where Jesus was laid. She walked carrying spices, herbs, and an ointment so that she could properly anoint her friend's body, her last act of devotion for him, her last act of love. She was walking with her head down, watching where her feet were to make sure she didn't trip. And then when she got near the tomb, she looked up and she saw the stone had been moved. There was a gap in the where the stone had been. It wasn't quite light enough to see everything, but she crept over and peered in, and there was enough light to see that he was gone. He was gone, and she burst into fresh tears, knowing they had taken him away. They had taken away that last act of devotion. They had taken everything from her, and now even this, adding insult to injury, they had taken his body. Well, she dropped the ointment, she dropped the herbs, they went scattering in the wind, and she ran back into the city crying. She ran to where John and Peter were staying. She knocked at their door. It wasn't hard to wake them up. They hadn't been sleeping anyways. They came out and she told them, "They've taken my Lord. I don't know where they've put him. They've taken him. He's gone." She told them about it. They immediately ran off, and they far outstripped her, far faster than her, towards the cave. She followed after them, and by the time that she got back to the tomb, Peter was inside the tomb with his head in his hands. John was just ducking in and looking around. They stood there quietly for a moment or two, confused, frustrated, bewildered, and looking weary, until finally they came out of the tomb and they went back to the city. But Mary stayed. She stayed. She sat down on the ground. She stayed to cry and to mourn over her friend. And as she was weeping, she suddenly heard a voice. She looked up, and there was a person in the tomb. Well, there were two people, but they weren't quite people. They were very bright people, bright and strong, and she had this sudden urge, this sudden fear gripping her heart, and this sudden urge to bow down and to worship these beings, these angels. But then one of them spoke in a voice full of compassion and said, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she said, "They have taken my Lord. They've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." The angel did not respond, but Mary heard a voice behind her. So she turned, and she saw another man approaching her. Obviously the gardener, the owner of this plot of land. And so she looked at him and she said, "Sir, if you've taken him away, you can just let me know where his body is. I'll go and take care of it. You see, I've brought my ointment. I've brought my herbs so that I could anoint his body. So if you could just tell me where he is, I'll go and get him. And you don't have to worry about it, because I'll go and take care of it." And then she waited for a rebuke, "Go away," or an explanation, or an apology, or a dismissal. But instead she heard her name, Mary. And her heart leapt, and she ran towards him and she said, "Rabboni, teacher, it's you." And he said, "Wait, not yet, not yet, not yet. Go and tell your brothers, my brothers and sisters, go and tell them what you've seen. Go and tell them that I am alive, that I am going to your Father and my Father, that I'm going to your God and my God. Go, run and tell them." And so Mary ran once again. She ran away from the tomb, back into the city, and by now the sun was up. It was no longer dark. All was clear. She ran into the city, and she was crying yet again, and she burst into the disciples' room. She burst into their fear, into their grief, into their disappointment, into their isolation. She burst in And she said, "He's risen. He's risen. I've seen him. I've seen the Lord. I have seen him. He is alive. He is alive." And she was once again crying. And if you had asked her that morning, "Woman, why are you crying?" then she would have said, These are tears of joy. These are not tears of sadness. These are tears of joy because he is alive, because death could not hold him, because the grave could not hold him, because no matter what happened, they could not take my Lord away. He is alive, and because he is alive, I am alive, and everything is coming alive. Everything is being made new. My friends, why are you crying this morning? There's so much to cry about. This past week, I performed a funeral for a friend. This past week, I found out that one of our friends over in Kenya, who had been expecting twins, his wife gave birth to twins, and the little girl passed away after 2 days. There's so much to cry about. There's so much grief and pain and injustice in the world. And yet, although we know there's a time for tears, there's a time for grief, this morning we remember that they cannot take our Lord away. No virus can take him away. No tragedy can take him away. No depression or anxiety or fear can take him away. No oppression or injustice can take our Lord away. He is here. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. The good news, my friends, Jesus isn't going anywhere. He is here with us, and that is the best news of all. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Happy Easter, and many blessings to you.